Today we're going to talk about photography gear and just how much does it impact your landscape photography. So it seems almost inevitable that all photography channels eventually talk about gear. It seems like all conversations lead that way on any photography channel, whether it be portrait photography, landscape photography, or anything like that. Conversations lend themselves to camera bodies and are they good, are they not, lenses, what works well, what brand is good. You know, it's real easy to fall in this trap thinking that you have to have expensive gear to get out there and get good landscape photography. I mean, even look at my channel. I talk about Nikons, I talk about the Z7 II, talk about different lenses and different camera bags, and it's just natural as photographers for us to talk about gear. Gear is the tools of our trade. It's what we use to get our job done, whether it be the camera equipment itself, the gear we use to carry camera equipment into a place, any of that. But the important thing to remember is those gear conversations shouldn't keep you from getting out there and practicing, even if you're not on the greatest gear or what the current YouTuber is saying is the greatest gear or anything like that. There's so much more to landscape photography than just the gear. You don't need a Nikon Z7 II or a Z9 to go out and start shooting landscape photography. Gear should not be a barrier to entry for the hobby or the recreation of landscape photography. Are there gear considerations to make depending on what you're shooting? Yes, but just because you might not have the nicest gear does not mean you should not go out and practice. There's several other elements that factor into landscape photography that you can use to improve your skills, whether you never upgrade gear or in the future upgrade gear or anything like that. In a lot of ways, it's only natural that photographers end up talking about gear. Anytime you have a passion about something, whether it be photography, cars, bicycles, when you're not able to go out and practice those things, you tend to talk about the gear in your off time. You talk about the camera. It's fine to have a passion about it. And for some people, the gear is super interesting. The specs, those little micro percentage points of improvement in image quality or anything like that is something fun to talk about. And some people get great joy out of that. And it's fine to talk about that. The thing to keep in mind though is if those gear talks are frustrating to you, just sort of step yourself away from them and focus on what you do have and practicing with what you've got. Don't let the gear talks put you off on photography or keep you indoors because you think, well, I can't go out and shoot that because I don't have this lens or my lens isn't fast or I don't have that camera body. Don't let that happen because there's so many more elements of landscape photography to practice that are not gear dependent. You know, it's so easy to hear people talk about brands where, oh, if you don't shoot Canon or you don't shoot Nikon, you're just not getting the best. And brand loyalty tends to come from because people don't want to feel like they made a bad choice with their purchasing decisions. So, you know, if you go out and you buy the latest Sony camera, you don't want someone to tell you, oh, well, you should have got a Nikon. You sort of dig in behind your camera brand and call it the best. It's just sort of a natural inclination. People tend to be loyal. You know, you make a pretty sizable investment into your camera system, regardless of which brand, you know, through the lenses and the camera bodies and the batteries and the spare parts and even things like L brackets that fit your camera. So you start to make that investment, people start to dig in behind their brand. But I'm here to tell you, it really doesn't matter what brand you shoot, whether you be a Nikon shooter, a Sony shooter, Pentax, Panasonic, Canon, any of those, brand is not super important. The key thing is to get out there and shoot. You should be comfortable with your camera brand that you choose, and you know, I'm a big one for go pick up different cameras, see how they feel. You know, as far as image quality and features, they're all so similar in the same ballpark that it really comes down, in my opinion, to go check them out, pick them up, hold them, what feels good in your hand. I'm a Nikon shooter, and why is that? Well, partially, it's what my dad shot back in the film days, so that's just the brand I lean towards all through my years, from the early DSLRs to the mirrorless today. That's just the brand I gravitate towards. Now, with that said, I really love how a Nikon feels in my hand. The grip feels great, and it just feels really comfortable to me. But I'm not going to argue with someone and say, my Nikon shoots better than your Canon or better than your Sony. It's just really not that important to me. Now, most of my videos here on this channel will be Nikon focused outside of my Micro Four Thirds work, just because it's the brand I have, it's the camera bodies I have, and it's the lenses I had. So while my channel tends to be more Nikon focused, it's not because I think it's the only camera brand to shoot with. It's what I have, it's what I have access to, so it's what I talk about. So just keep that in mind as you're watching videos. A lot of these people that they're, you know, talking about Sonys and talking about Canons, they're probably shooting it because that's the gear they have, so that's what they can talk about. It doesn't necessarily mean one is better than the other. There's so many landscape photography techniques that can do more to improve your photography than the gear itself. Again, don't let gear be your barrier to entry. So where gear is important is making sure you have what's appropriate for the type of photography you want to do. If you want to do big wide vistas, then you're going to need a wide angle lens. So you want to make sure you have that in your kit, because it can't really trick a telephoto lens into wide angle vistas. Similar, maybe you want to do macro photography and those intimates and those close-ups. Well, you might want more of a telephoto or a macro lens to be able to do that. That's where the gear considerations are sort of important. There's some features on a camera that might be more important to others. For example, if you're a wildlife photographer, you know, in a mirrorless, how the auto eye focus works could be more important to you versus someone like me that's a little more less wildlife and more just waterfalls and woodland scenes and things like that, where my eye autofocus is not super important. That's the considerations when you think about gear that you should be considering. What feature do you need brand agnostic? Now, if you've bought into a brand and you know you're in the Nikon world, then when you're looking for those things, what has the best wildlife eye autofocus? Well, I'm probably gonna be looking at a Z9 for that. However, until I can afford a Z9, I would not go out and shoot. I would get out there with what I've got and practice. So that's where gear considerations can be important and factor into what purchase you make, what you carry in your bag. So that feature to function is where gear is important, making sure that you match the gear you do use, regardless of brand, to the type of photography you want to do, and then go from there. Don't let some YouTuber or someone on the internet say, if it's not this camera and this brand, it's not going to work, because that's just simply not true. And finally, for today, we sort of popped out here to a local waterfall, one to test out my new waterproof socks, just to see how they work. We'll see how that is in a future video probably. I want to talk about some non-photography gear that's helpful. But what I did is I brought out my travel setup. My travel setup is a Panasonic GX85, super small. I can pack 3 lenses and that camera into a really small bundle, which is great for vacations and trips where landscape photography is not my primary thing. But one other unique thing about that setup is that whole setup is like a $600 setup when you find it on sale as a bundle, sometimes even a little bit cheaper. It's a decent little camera, micro four thirds, 16 megapixels, and I'm gonna shoot this waterfall here today with that camera and show you that you don't need the thousands and thousands of dollars equipment that typically carry out into the field. You can go out with a $600 setup, practice your landscape photography, practice your compositions, and walk away with some great shots. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna shoot with the Panasonic GX85. I do just have the kit lens, the 12 to 32 on here, which with the crop factor of 2 makes this at the widest a 24 millimeter. I am going to toss a circular polarizer on here. It's not super bright in the water, but I just want to get some of those saturated colors, take any glare that is coming off through the overcast sky out of there. So we're going to set that up. Just going to play around here a little bit, use this camera, and sort of see what we can do with sort of a $600 setup. Like I said, this is my travel setup when I'm going on a family vacation and don't want to lug along a ton of equipment. I can fit this little camera, this lens, and 2 other lenses into a super small, tiny pack. Makes it super convenient for when I want a real camera with me, but I don't want to lug all my normal stuff. So super handy camera for that. I've shot this in other videos. Be sure to take a look on the channel. I'll put some in the description if I remember. And you can take a look at when I've been out with this camera before. I did the 1 lens challenge with this camera with a 25 millimeter lens, and I took this to another local waterfall to sort of show my travel setup. Yeah, let's get this circular polarizer on. We'll head out here and let's see if we can get this waterfalls. I haven't been to this waterfall since it was frozen, so I was back here in like January and the falls were frozen. First time I've actually been here while it's been flowing. Nice little morning out. We'll get some waterfall pictures, because that's what I like. So what I like about the GX85, besides just being lightweight and small, I get full manual control of the camera, just like I do with my bigger cameras. Interchangeable lens system. You know, I've got a set of filters for it with a step-down rings like I use on my bigger equipment, and it all packs down super small. Shoot with a histogram just like normal on this. For this falls, you know, where it's coming over the top, there's always that highlights problem of that water comes right over, super bright light. So that's what I'm sort of working through right now. I'm trying to decide if I'm getting the right amount of blur. Like I said, motion blurs with the waterfalls, that's sort of the thing you really want to sort of dial in. And once I start getting that, I'll play a little more with my composition. Using the histogram just like I do on normal cameras and everything like that, you know, I have it in my live view. I kick it over to the right as much as I can without blowing the highlights. And yeah, that's what we do. And I actually want just a little bit more blur, I think, these waterfalls. So I am actually going to swap in an ND filter and just see what we can get done with that as well. So I'm going to toss that on, just see. Like I said, really just trying to dial in my exposure. As I get that in, then I'm going to start moving around and working on my composition with this. Okay, I did swap in my ND filter on this. I do like the exposure a little bit better. We may swap back circular polarizer as we play around here a little bit. So now I'm gonna just sort of work on my composition a little bit and move around, get a couple different shots on this GX85. We'll get these home, get them edited. I'll toss them in at the end of the video, and we'll just sort of show you don't always need that high-end, high-dollar equipment. My $600 bundled travel camera can do a pretty good job as well. So yeah, let's play around. Okay, so that about wraps up my playing with the GX85. Again, I just sort of want to come out here and take some photos with sort of what essentially is a $600 bundle for a camera body, couple lenses, kit lenses, and just sort of show you can get out here and practice and do your thing without super expensive gear. The important thing is get out there. Don't let the gear discussions, the brand discussions out there on the internet deter you from getting out there and practicing landscape photography. There are so many other things other than gear that will make bigger differences in your landscape photography, such as learning composition, learning your camera settings, regardless of what camera you have, making sure you know how your camera settings work and know how to tweak them to get the images you want. You know, like I said, I mentioned composition, that's important. Even when you get home, and learning some basic editing is gonna help you. You're gonna be able to take these raw files, bring them home, work them in Lightroom or Photoshop or your editor of choice, and get some amazing, stunning images. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Like I said, photographers are passionate about their craft. They're gonna talk about gear. It's sort of how we keep engaged when you're not out photographing. But if that gear talk starts to get frustrating to you, or you feel like you can never do it because you don't have the right gear or an expensive enough gear, just step away from the gear talks for a while, pick up the camera you've got, pick up the lenses you've got and the gear you've got, and get out there and practice. There's so many other things to practice to improve your landscape photography that you don't have to have the gear to improve your landscape craft. So if you liked today's video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me in the future, including tips, tricks, mini gear reviews, a little behind the scenes, and talks like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything. And thank you for watching.